Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other. My family lived in the same house for generations, and our property stretched over 15 acres of land. As kids, my siblings and I spent countless hours exploring every inch of those woods and fields. Even after I moved away for college and work, I treasured any opportunity to return home and relive those memories. When my dad passed away unexpectedly last year, I made the difficult decision to move back permanently. As heartbreaking as it was to return home without him there, I knew I needed to care for my mom and the property. The first few months back were peaceful, almost like old times. I reconnected with childhood friends, helped my mom around the house, and spent weekends maintaining the land. That tranquility was shattered one sunny afternoon as I cleared brush on the edge of our land. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and turned to see an unfamiliar SUV barreling up the dirt road bordering our property. An annoyed-looking woman emerged, hands on her hips. "Excuse me," she yelled. "Just what do you think you're doing on my property?" I stared at her, dumbfounded. "I'm not sure what you mean. This is my family's land," she scoffed. "Don't play dumb with me. I bought this property fair and square 2 months ago. Now get off my land before I call the police." My shock quickly turned to frustration. I'd lived here my whole life and knew every inch of these woods. There was no way even a sliver of our land had been sold. "Look, I don't know who told you this was your property, but I assure you it's not," I said evenly. "My family has owned this land for over 50 years. The woman's eyes narrowed, lip curling in contempt. "Is that so? Because I have a deed right here that proves otherwise." She shoved a paper in my face. "Maybe next time get your facts straight before trespassing?" I took a calming breath before responding. "I'm sorry, but I have valid documentation that proves this land belongs to my family. We did not sell any portion of it." The woman grew increasingly irate, hands clenched at her sides. "Enough with your lies. This is my property, and I'm calling the police to deal with you." She stormed off toward her vehicle, pulling out her cell phone. I stood there in dismay as she reported an intruder on her land. This had to be some kind of mistake. Within minutes, a police cruiser arrived, the officer stepping out to address the indignant woman first. She spewed exaggerations, making me out to be some hostile criminal. The officer approached me, his expression stern. "Sir, this woman claims you are trespassing on her property. I'm going to need to see some identification." I politely complied, explaining the situation and assuring him my family owned the land. I showed him my driver's license, proving my address matched the property's. The officer turned to the woman. "Ma'am, can you provide any documentation proving ownership of this land?" "Of course." She held up the deed smugly. The officer examined it and paused, frowning. "Ma'am, according to records our office has, this deed is not valid. The boundaries are incorrect and this land still belongs to the family here." He gestured to me. The woman's smugness evaporated, replaced by disbelief. "What? That can't be!" She glanced from the deed to me and back again. I stood calmly as I watched realization dawn on her. The officer continued, "I will need to take this deed as evidence of fraudulent documentation." He placed it in an evidence bag. "I'd advise not coming onto this property again unless you want to face trespassing charges." The woman stammered in outrage as the officer escorted her from my family's land. Before driving off, she leveled a glare at me. "This isn't over," she spat angrily. I waved as she departed, shaking my head. The audacity of some people. The officer came over to me again, his expression now apologetic. "Sorry for the confusion, sir, but thank you for your cooperation. We've been trying to track down the source of these phony deeds. We'll begin an investigation immediately." I thanked him profusely for his help, assuring him I didn't blame him for the misunderstanding. After he left, I marveled at the bizarre encounter. I headed straight to the county clerk's office to ensure our documentation was up to date. The clerk fortunately confirmed and provided copies of our valid deed and survey maps. Over the next week, I installed security cameras and no trespassing signs around the perimeter just in case that delusional woman tried anything again. I also consulted my lawyer to see if I had any options should she pursue legal action. He said her fraudulent deed gave me plenty of evidence to countersue if needed. Sure enough, a summons arrived in the mail that week. The audacity of that woman to actually try and sue me. I immediately got my lawyer involved. In the end, the judge threw out her ridiculous lawsuit, citing lack of evidence and validity. Not only that, but my lawyer successfully filed a counterclaim, getting her charged with falsifying documents. As we left the court, vindicated, I saw her standing on the courthouse steps looking lost and defeated. She had the nerve to call out to me, spewing apologies and excuses to try and salvage her dignity. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. Justice had been properly served. She ended up with a criminal charge while I got a restraining order granted to keep her well away from me and my family's property. Don't mess with this, Mama Bear's land. The entitlement of some people is just astounding. But in the end, the truth and law prevailed. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I was an in-house lawyer in a multinational company that sold software. I specifically joined this relatively lesser-known company to learn more about compliance. The company was listed on the stock exchange, meaning more compliance work. I highlighted this specifically as one of the reasons for my seeking out a change. I discovered it was filled with senior citizens, not an age thing, when I joined. Basically, a company full of old-timers who are there purely because they're close to the company's owners. As part of the onboarding experience, I had to sit through sermons of how they changed the industry and how they know XX. This meant I had 3 different bosses, one senior guy who was the fixer. I'll call him Senior Guy 1 for convenience. No one really knew what he did, but he got a cabin to himself. Another was an ex-senior management guy who got a gig from the owner to negotiate tech contracts, Senior Guy 2. I highlight this because this ex-senior management guy asked me, "What's a Yule?" Another was my reporting manager, with whom I was expected to work on a day-to-day basis, Senior Guy 3. 1 month after joining, I was told that the company was going private through a sale to another entity. I was shocked, but I had loans to pay, so I continued. For some reason, I was senior enough for them to handle this independently. This meant I worked through nights to complete tasks that a law firm would ordinarily do. I also worked on the definitive agreement that was in use for the company to be sold. This will become important later. By the 3rd month, I had decided the role wasn't what was advertised and that I was essentially cheap labor for M&A. Buyers were from another city and planned to have their office there. I was not keen on moving. I read between the lines and started lining up interviews. Things went south quickly. Old-timers were unhappy that I was looking for a job because that would mean they're answerable to owners or worse, have to do the work themselves. Cue the harassment, which really solidified my resolve to leave. All my complaints about Senior Guy 1 and AMP 2 to Senior Guy 3 were met with typical management talk. He sympathized and bad-mouthed them for burdening the company that he tolerates, only because they are closer to the owner. Senior Guy 2 started countering all my remarks / comments on drafting on email. Even minor agreement points required discussion. If it was his mistake, then we had a call. If not, then he made sure to document it. If I raised a point, I was being rigid. However, if Senior Guy 2 raised the point, it suddenly made commercial sense. Edit, clarified some obvious thought fart of a sentence here. This wasn't my first rodeo. I really didn't care about proving a point because I wanted out as soon as possible. Any pushback fights are going to be on deaf ears because, from where I am, labor laws are, at best, recommendations unless you're unionized. The only option is to leave. I was pissed and tired of being pushed over, but I wondered if it was just me angry at the whole situation and finding faults. I had an opportunity to test my theory. So, in one of the contracts that we were drafting, I made some comments and sent them to Senior Guy 2. As expected, he countered with verbal suggestions on the phone, which didn't make sense obviously. However, because he is senior, I had to do the song and dance to explain the points. So I arranged for the call, explained to him, and documented this on email, attributing each verbal recommendation, time of the call, and the decisions suggested by him. Then I sent this back to him for approval. However, this time I CC'd my boss Senior Guy 3 and asked for his approval on recommendations. Surprisingly, this practice was entirely new to them. Both of them were pissed at me. Senior Guy 2 and 3 were not happy. Senior Guy 2 was being questioned for the first time on email, and Senior Guy 3 couldn't ignore my email as the head of my department. Unsurprisingly, I got a single-line non-answer from Senior Guy 3 basically asking me to discuss this with Senior Guy 2, followed by a verbally heated instruction to just do what Senior Guy 2 wants and not bother him. Now I was sure that this wasn't going to work for me in the short term or the long term, so I resigned and gave my notice period of 1 month since I was on probation. Senior Guy 3 was pissed because he thought the notice period was for 3 months and the sale of the company was expected to close in 2 months. Cue the 1 month harassment that typically follows in any toxic work environment after you resign. On the last working day, I walked up to Senior Guy 3's cabin and did the obligatory thank you communication. He basically told me that I am picking a huge fight and he will see that I never get employed in the industry again. He also told me that he is not going to pay me my full and final settlement of dues and a relieving letter, a huge deal in India to get to your next job. Employers hold off on these as blackmail for troublesome employees. His tone implied that there is very little I could do because they were all senior guys and they'd been there, done that. I wasn't the first disgruntled employee for him. I said my goodbyes. I got it to confirm that I have returned the company assets and CC'd my personal email. However, I was pissed as well at the whole ordeal and had made up my mind not to show this on my CV. Revenge starts here. I call it my 1-2 shot. Shot 1. Once I left, I spoke with my friend and decided to serve a legal notice detailing the ordeal and treatment meted out to me. Ordinarily, the legal notice barely makes a difference as the management is usually thick-skinned about it. However, the legal notice was also sent to the owners, not just the company. This wasn't really required, but I did it anyways. Turns out many directors were pissed at Senior Guy 1, 2, and 3, but were quiet just waiting to sell this company out. My act of involving the owners meant the entire board, including outside directors mandatory for listed entities. This turned into a festival of explanations by all three in front of the owners. From what I hear, they all had to personally take leave to meet the owners, as shareholders, and explain themselves as naughty kids. Needless to say, everyone in the company was talking about it. I waited for 1 month to see if the notice had any effect aside from them being chided like kids. Expectedly, I got no response, but I knew from grapevine that they now had to spend on a law firm to reply to me because shareholders were aware of this information. I had made my point, but now I wanted more. I really didn't want to drag it because I was also looking for jobs and had loans to pay. However, their template management response, this time with HR copied, basically implied that since I had left without notice, they were evaluating all options, including considering me AWOL. Senior Guy 2 basically threatened me that he will not pay me my dues or my relieving letter, evidencing service, and implied that there is very little I can do about it. Petty that I am, I made plans to get both. Shot 2. Since I had access to the definitive agreement and remembered huge details about it, having worked with law firms through the agreement in detail, I was aware of who stays, goes. I made sure to speak to those who were going to let go. Cue mass resignations and missed deadlines. I knew the specific approvals that would trigger because of the transaction, so I spoke to the authority who would approve this transaction as a disgruntled employee. The authority made their own inquiries. The owners got spooked. It was definitely not serious enough to scare them into thinking that the deal won't get approved, but the mere fact that a government authority was calling them meant they now had to deal with the authority, which would have never happened if it wasn't for me. Result: buyer used this as a low-value bargaining chip, citing bad employee experience and resignation of several key members on key projects. I got my dues and relieving letter, evidencing service, within 48 hours of Shot 2. Company got gossip for years on how the management was dumb enough to mess with a lawyer, including a sermon from owners on how to not piss off employees when they are trying to sell the company. Senior Guy 1 and AMP 2 were left red-faced but survived because of old ties. However, their contracts were not renewed. Senior Guy 3, who threatened me, became a consultant after the company was sold. The next one is a petty revenge story. I do office work and have recently conducted several audits to get our files prepared for the new year. I realized that many employees were missing various items in their files. This was not anyone's fault because the company never had proper admin employees. I was hired specifically to clean up files and ensure state and federal compliance. This particular employee, we'll call him Paul, works remotely and never answers his emails or phone calls. There was an audit I was working on and I realized that about 60 employees needed to sign a form. 59 of them signed it within the week, but Paul never responded to me. I called and emailed him for about 3 months until he finally sent it back. It's unfortunate that I had to keep an audit open for this long because of him. He has done this multiple times, though, and he also missed 2 mandatory online classes that I conducted. I had to jump through hoops for him to take the class. He's always the last one to complete anything that I ask of him, and it's quite unfair that I have to spend many hours calling and emailing him, all for a task that takes a mere 5 seconds for him to complete. Anyway, we are ordering new shirts for the whole company because they met the sales goals. It's just a gift, and we understand that we cannot make everyone happy. Maybe some don't like the color or fabric, etc. The owner made it very clear that we will send one shirt to every address, and there will be no returns or exchanges for any reason. This is because the shirts are custom made and quite expensive, and also because it's a gift, not like a company uniform or anything. I spent many hours getting everyone's sizes and entering them into a spreadsheet, but guess who never responded? Paul. Although I've never met Paul in person, I've seen a photo, and I would guess he's about 6'3" and around 300 pounds. So guess who ordered him a size extra small? The next one is a malicious compliance story. So, around the beginning of the pandemic, I landed a job at a well-known US fast food chain. The GM, general manager, was a tall, stocky, bald guy. He really liked my interview, so from the beginning, he told me that he hired me with the intention of making me a manager someday soon. So I busted my butt every day proving my worth, often doing the work of a full staff, around 8 people, all by myself. I worked this hard because my previous job had just laid me off due to the effects of the pandemic on the hospitality industry, canceled vacations and so on, and so I was just happy to have a job. In order to become a manager, you had to take the ServSafe exam. Usually you'd get promoted whether or not you passed the exam, but per state law, there was always to be a ServSafe certified manager on duty at all shifts. Given that there were so few of us, 3, including myself and the GM, that ServSafe certification was invaluable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. One day in the middle of my shift, the GM approaches me with a book to study for my certification. I'm excited because I know that this means a promotion and a significant pay raise. I study this book like my life depends on it, with every free moment that I get throughout the day spent in the book. I'm a quick study and I progress really well through the book, but there is one major issue. The more I read, the more I discover that there were so many health violations happening at the workplace. People, a lot of these fast food workers aren't paid enough to care about cleanliness. Most places will be okay with the appearance of cleanliness. I mean improper food storage, cross-contamination, changing the dates on expired products, just to name a few. We even had minors, 16, 17, working in the kitchen. I decided to approach the GM about my concerns, hoping that we could get to work on fixing a few things. Instead, I met with him snarling back at me. Just do what I say. I am shocked. Then he begins to make my life as miserable as he can. He would intentionally short-staff the shifts that I worked because he knew that I wouldn't complain about doing extra work, and then when our numbers suffered because there were literally 3 of us doing the work of 7, 8 people, he would bark at me at the beginning of the next shift in the presence of my co-workers. He went in deep, calling me worthless and all types of names just to degrade me. He would normally threaten my job about 2, 3 times during a shift. I actually began to gaslight myself into believing that I was in the wrong and to just work harder. It didn't really click that I wasn't doing anything wrong until one day when I stopped by during the morning shift. I worked nights to check on something, and I noticed the morning manager clock in, then go back outside to smoke and have breakfast. I was so shocked because no one said anything. I approached one of the morning guys that I knew I could trust and asked him if this was a normal occurrence. He said yes, along with so many other things that this female manager got away with that I would probably be fired on the spot for. During this entire fiasco, after many breakdowns where I would go to the freezer to cry, I did it. I passed the ServSafe exam. I was very proud of myself. If my life was miserable before, I don't have the words to begin to describe what my life became after getting certified. Apparently, and I have no way of verifying this, the GM became threatened by me and intensified my misery. I forgot to mention that in an attempt to save money so his numbers looked good, he would literally make some workers work days for free. Let me explain. I noticed that some employees would work double 5 days a week and get paid the exact same as the workers who worked normal hours. People, listen to me. Hard work is rarely, if at all, rewarded in the US. This man would manipulate the time clocks to essentially force some of the more gullible employees to work overtime and only get paid for 40 hours. I kid you not, there was this young girl fresh out of high school who would somehow manage to work 70 plus hours a week and only be paid for 40. She somehow thought this was normal. Here's the kicker. While he was manipulating the clocks and abusing some of these kids, he would always be on the clock even when he'd left for the day. One day, I had the audacity to clock him out because he wasn't in. This man gave me the tongue lashing of a lifetime the next time he saw me. Now comes the karma, and it was sweet. The thing about cosmic justice is that it has a sense of humor and irony. I specifically remember that in one of my GM's tirades, he would tell me that I would be coming in here as just a customer and not an employee at some point. Keep this in mind because this is important for later. So a random Tuesday morning, I'm still recovering from last night's shift when I get a phone call from one of the morning employees. She can barely get a word out in utter shock, but I made out that she was saying, "They just fired GM." I let out this maniacal laugh that I'm sure my entire neighborhood heard. I laughed to the point of crying. So apparently, the store was doing so badly that it caught corporate's attention. They sent a couple of guys to do an audit, and get this, they pointed out every violation that I had previously pointed out to the GM. It was so bad that they fired him on the spot. The corporate guys became our acting GM, and the store had to be shut down for a couple of days to fix the crap fest that it had become. Get this. Remember how the GM said that I would one day come to the store as a customer and not an employee? Well, guess who ended up coming to order food a week after being fired? I almost snapped my ankle running to the front to serve him with a smirk. To make matters worse, his wife left him after he was fired. Apparently he was cheating on her with the morning shift manager. It all made sense now, how she got away with anything. We only found out because she used his phone to text the work group chat exposing the affair and telling us that this man had contracted an STD from the affair. It felt great to be validated and vindicated for everything I pointed out. Over the next couple of weeks, we went through a couple of GMs from neighboring stores who came to fill in. Eventually, things got way better. I left the job a few months later for health reasons and got a better job that paid twice what I was making back there. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.